Thank you so much, Mort. I appreciate the introduction. I have a lot of things to say about Mort too, but good things only. But Bezat Hashem, when he gives his shiur, I want to be the makdim. Tiskudim mitzvot, thank you everyone for being here. I told Sina last night that I'm a little emotional right now. As much as I'm happy to be learning with you, I'm also sad that this is the last of this series. But I'm sure that we will go Michayel El Chayel and we'll continue learning together in other opportunities. So for right now, let's focus on what we were given, the task at hand. I'm speaking today about gelatin and a few other sensitive ingredients. And perhaps before we talk about gelatin, I'll tell you a story. I was once asked to speak in a Kehillat. And I was really, for a few months, I was working on a wonderful, I'm working on a book, Bezat Hashem, it'll come out one day. The understanding of prison systems and Halacha, justice system, the rights, the human rights of criminals, people that our society usually see as undeserving. Those of you who have learned with my Rabbinic, you've heard about deserving and undeserving poor and the like. And I really wanted to share, and when I came to the Kehillat, I said, what do you want to learn about? And they said, Rabbi, we want to learn about gelatin. I remember feeling like a balloon that you inflated the air. Like here, I want to share with you something Midoraita, something Chachamim spoke about, something that the Rishonim argued about. And then, what do you want to learn? About gelatin. Okay, but what do our Chachamim tell us? You should only study what your heart wants you to study. So if your heart wants to study about gummy bears, let us study about gummy bears. And so today, I want to put the gelatin issue to rest. For some reason, this has become one of the more famous or infamous issues that we deal with quite regularly. I always tell my moderators on our Shiviti forum, if one more person asks me about gummy bears and gelatin, I'm going to lose my mind. So today, we're going to actually give a proper shiur to understand what is going on here with gelatin. As I've told you in the past, not everyone agrees on this topic. I'm certain that there are even people here who may have passionate opinions about whether gelatin is mutar or not. Today is my shiur, so it's my chance to share with you the way we see gelatin here. If you don't agree, you're more than welcome to give another shiur, and I will be happy to attend. And if the emet is with you, I will be convinced in the other direction. Let's start again in Masechet Avodah Zarah. In Masechet Avodah Zarah, and if you notice, we have 42 pages of sources. So today I'm going to be telling you most of the sources as we go along, instead of reading every word for ourselves. Our Chachamim discuss a matter called Noten Ta'am Livgam. We've discussed this together in the context of Hechsher Kelim, of making utensils kasher. What is Noten Ta'am Livgam? Something that falls into a food mixture. It's put into a food mixture. And this something is not a good something. So imagine spoiled milk falling into your chicken soup. It's not milk, it's spoiled milk, it's rancid milk. Noten Ta'am Livgam, what we know is mutar. It's something that is permissible. Now the rabbis debated over here. And if you look on page 2, you will see that really there's a fundamental argument between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Meir believes that rancid food, Noten Ta'am Livgam, something that gives bad flavor into a mixture, is forbidden only when that food was always rancid, it was always bad. But if it is something that turned rancid, so milk would be a great example of that, then that would never be nullified, at least not in this way. And by contrast, Rabbi Shimon believes that it doesn't have to be rancid from the beginning. It could be something that turned bad, and that's something that is now inside of our food is no longer an issue because it is Noten Ta'am Livgam. The way they learn this from is a verse in Vayikra. Source 2. If your brother becomes impoverished and his hand becomes shaky among you, he's suffering financially. And you, interesting. I may have quoted you the wrong verse here. In any case, our Chachamim, I did quote you the wrong verse. Look here. Look in the Gemara on page 2, on the top right. The pasuk says, "You shall not eat of any unslaughtered animal carcass, who may give it to the resident alien, a ger who is within your gates." So unslaughtered animal carcass is not kasher for us. But who is it fitting for? There are non-Jewish people that are residents of the land of Israel. They're gerei toshav. They fall into a very unique halachic category of people who, maybe if I could summarize for you, they're citizens of a Jewish state, but not full-fledged citizens of a Jewish state. You can give this food to a ger toshav. And I brought verse 2 to show you what is a ger toshav. Rashi says, Im hu ger o toshav. Is he a ger or toshav? Is he a stranger or a resident? Vezu toshav, kol shekibel alav shuna avod avodah zara, vochen nevelot. These are people who are not Jewish, but quasi-citizens of the state of Israel. They've accepted to live in Israel and not worship idols. But they still eat nivelot. They still eat food that are dead animals. They're still eating that, and therefore, so long as you can give it to him, the question is it really a thing that is inedible, or is it just inedible to a Jew? Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Shimon argue. Rabbi Meir says, if this thing was always not fit for human consumption, then it falls into food, it's fine. But if it is fit for human consumption originally, now it's spoiled, it doesn't work. Rabbi Shimon disagrees. So long as right now it's not fit for human consumption, if it falls into food, there really is not an issue with this. And now, we should see what the poskim do with this information. If you turn with me to page 3, I quoted to you here, the Rambam, Maran, and the Rama, and they're all on the same page. So everyone is now in Shalom Bayit here, in source 1 on page 3. The Rambam tells us, Kol ha'ochalin asurin, all of the foods that are forbidden, eno chayav alehen ad sheyochal otam derech hana'ah. You only are prohibited, you only violate a prohibition. Better yet, you're only liable for a penalty if you eat them in the way that they're supposed to be eaten. Chutz mi basar b'chalav v'chilei hakerem, except for these two exceptions of meat and milk and chilei hakerem. Lefi shlo ne'emar behen achila, because there the Torah didn't say achila, there it talked about cooking and other things. Ketzad, so for example, what's an example the Rambam gives? Oh, you took something that was forbidden, you swallowed it and it was so hot till your throat burned from it. Or you ate it raw. Or you mixed in bitter things. La'ana, I recently bought myself tea made out of la'ana. It's not what I was expecting. I almost died from it. La'ana is what they call it wormwood in English. You can buy a special tea, wormwood tea. I remember it in Moroccan tradition, Shiba. They told me this one is Shiba. It's definitely not Shiba. It's definitely not Shiba. I ordered this tea, and the whole world collapsed around me. The flavor was so terribly bitter. There's no word I can tell you for that. So you mix this bitter herb, the toch yen nesech, in forbidden wine, or the toch gdera shelinvela, or with meat that is forbidden, v'achlan kashen marin, and you ate this meat, or you drank this wine, now that is completely bitter. Or you ate non-kosher food, but after it spoiled and became rancid. And it's no longer fit for human consumption, but you ate it anyways, says the Rambam, hare ze patur. You are exempt from consequences, liability. By the way, these words, hare ze patur, are going to be the topic of much conversation soon. When it says exempt, does it mean I'm allowed to do it? Or just that if I do it, nothing will happen to me? But I'm not allowed to do it. We're going to discuss soon. ואם ערב דבר מר בתוך גדרה של בשר בחלב או ביין כלי הכרם ואכלו חייב. But if you mix the bitter herbs into meat and milk mixtures or chilei kerem mixtures, which we're not allowed to have any benefit from at all, then a person will still be liable for a consequence, even if it has bitter flavor in it. Rambam tells us in source 2, Kvar be'arnu, we've already explained previously, שאם נתן דבר האסור טעמו בדבר המותר, that if you mix something which is forbidden and it gives flavor into that which is permissible, נאסר הכל, everything is prohibited. Meaning, if your forbidden meat falls into your kasher meat, it's forbidden to eat that. Why? It gives off flavor, and you're not allowed to eat non-kasher flavor. במה דברים אמורים? When does that apply? בשהשביחו, when that meat that fell in gives it a better flavor. אבל אם פגם זה האיסור למותר והפסיד טעמו, הרי זה מותר. But if one fell into the other and it ruined the flavor of the food that it fell into, it is permissible. והוא שיהיה פוגם מתחילה ועד סוף. But, says the Rambam, here's the question. It has to be rancid from the beginning until the end. אבל אם פגם בתחילה, but if it's something that doesn't taste good now, וסופו להשביח, but ultimately it will become good. או השביח בתחילה, or it was good in the beginning, אף על פי שסופו לפגום, even though later it will be bad, הרי זה אסור. Rambam is making an exception to this rule of noten tam livgam. It matters, does it stay prohibited or does it not stay prohibited? I'm going to give you a sneak peek now to understand what exactly we're dealing with. And that is gelatin, which we're going to talk about on the next page. But just quickly. Gelatin comes from non-kosher animals, or at the very least, kosher animals that are nivelot utrefot. made of their bones. They dry them, they turn them into a powder, and they make them to congeal things like gummy bears, like puddings and yogurts and ice creams and all kinds of things like that. Gelatin pops up in the most unusual places sometimes also. You can find it in the most interesting places for consistency's sake. Gelatin began as something that was able to be consumed. It was an animal, non-kosher. But then it was turned, at least according to our understanding, into something which was inedible. It was not good tasting. This gelatin is a foul. Nobody eats gelatin powder the way that it comes. Fine, so it's asur. Now it's not a big deal. But once it's put back into food, then it becomes edible again. And so the question really we're going to deal with today is, does gelatin that started off good, turned bad, and is now edible all over, clearly it's edible because we're eating it, yes? Is this something that is now permissible, or is it something that because it was asur, it stays asur, or because it became mutar, it became permissible, now no matter if you can eat it or not, it becomes mutar? Here from the Rambam we see that there is a difference between something that stays prohibited and something that later becomes edible again and then becomes prohibited all over again. Maran in the Shulchan Aruch in source 3 writes the following: Kol davar sheta'amo pagum, anything which tastes bad, eino oser ta'aravto, does not forbid its mixture. Ve'afilu en ta'amo pagum machamat atzmo, and even if the bad flavor doesn't come from itself, shebifnei atzmo hu mutam u'mshubach, it tastes great on its own. Ela shepogem ta'aravto mutar, that it only is pogem when it's mixed in. So imagine there's something like this. You have food, and this food shouldn't have another ingredient in it. That ingredient tastes fine on its own. But when you mix that ingredient, I'll give you an example. You have a bowl of cereal and milk, and you have some non-kosher ketchup. I'm giving you a crazy example for no good reason, and I want to illustrate my point. And now you put this ketchup in your cereal and milk. Now the ketchup itself is not pagum. But what did it do here? It made your food pagum. In which case, Maran says it's not a problem. So it can either be pagum machamat atzmo, the thing itself is rancid, or that the fact that it mixed into your food is what made it not good. Both of those things are mutarim. In the second halacha in Bet, Maran writes, Pagam ze en tzarich sheyivgom legamre ad sheyekatz leochlo. This not good tasting food doesn't have to be so bad tasting that you would never eat it. Ela afilu pogem ktzat, even if it's a little bit not good. Eino oser ta'arovto. It does not prohibit that which it fell into. Maran writes this halacha. It doesn't have to be so bad tasting that you wouldn't eat it. It just has to be something that's a little bit bad tasting. The mixture is a little bit bad. And here you might actually see Maran is taking a stance that seems to be, at least without all the people that others do, not necessarily in agreement with the Rambam. Now Maran mentions V'yesh mishomer, there's one who says, and he now goes through many different opinions. But at the end of the day, Maran's opinion is that davar pagum, even if it's not completely pagum, this thing does not make something else non-kosher. And an example that Rama gives, so if you look at the left column on page 3, in those brackets, funny looking brackets, that's the Rama. I tried to make it gray, but then you wouldn't be able to see it. So the Rama gives an example. V'chen b'davar she'en lo ta'am klal. Especially if there's something that has no flavor at all. Kegon hayora shematichin bo adavash. You have a pot. In this pot, what do the goyim do? They boil the honey in that pot. Or even you do it. Af al pi sheyesh sham raglei hadevorim. Even though there are bees' legs floating in the honey. I know that may make you not want to eat honey anymore. But there are insect legs inside of your honey. Lo ne'esra hayora v'chol kayotze b'zeh. That does not prohibit the pot, for example, because bees' legs don't give off flavor. And even if they give off flavor, it's not a good flavor. And that's a classic case where we're not concerned about something not kasher being mixed into something kasher. That would be a classic case of something which is pagum. Now, everything else we're going to talk about concerning gelatin, Maran, the Rambam, the Rama, they don't speak about gelatin. This is not something they talk about. And as such, I can't tell you, the Shulchan Aruch says X. What I can tell you is, the Shulchan Aruch says A. Gelatin is this. Does it fit into what the Shulchan Aruch says, or does it not? is what the Shulchan Aruch writing applicable to gelatin or is it not? And as with any other interpretation and any other analysis of a halakha, there are going to be differences of opinions depending how you are able to explain or not explain a new scenario which has now popped up into the world, and you're trying to use old sources as precedents to new cases. As such, I've broken up this conversation into a few different elements. Initially I was wondering, so how do I teach this to you? I can't go from the Gemara to the Rambam to Shulchan. There's simply no flow of gelatin. I said, maybe I'll go backwards. Maybe I'll take one of the Acharonim, like Chacham Ovadia Yosef, who wrote a numerous page teshuvah, and we'll go through every one of his sources. And I said, I'd rather break down the concepts surrounding gelatin into a few categories. And then I will also share with you the opinions of those who use those concepts to teach different things regarding gelatin. So for right now, I want to approach one part of the conversation is whether gelatin is kasher or not. Has to do with if something is as dry as wood. Let's look at the Rama on page 4, source 1. Rama writes, Or hakeva, the flesh of the stomach of the cow. Sometimes they salt it and dry it. And it becomes like wood. That's dry. It's hard like wood. And they fill it up with milk. Why do they fill it up with milk? It now becomes some type of container. They use the cow's stomach and they dry it to the point where now you can use it as a utensil to hold milk. Mutar, it's permissible, even though that is a meat and milk mixture. Because now that it is completely dry, it is just like any other piece of wood. It's not a cow's stomach anymore. Yes, it's made of cow's stomach, but it no longer has the kashrut status of cow's stomach, of meat. Now it's just dry as wood, and it has no moisture left over from the meat that it once was. So the Rama teaches you something here, which is based on a shibboleh haleket that the Bet Yosef, Maran Rabbi Yosef Karo quotes in the Bet Yosef. The Rama says that a cow's stomach that is dry like wood, you can now hold milk inside of it. And it is no longer prohibited from meat and milk mixture or forbidden mixture, whatever else it would be, because this no longer has the status of meat, rather it has the status of wood. The Shach. In source 2 says, he extends this even further. This is true with all the other inner organs. The intestines, when they dry them and they turn dry like wood. Nonetheless, the Shach puts in a qualifier. Yes, it's mutar, but ideally, don't do this. But it's mutar. Harav Peretz shows in source 3 that if you read the Shach properly elsewhere, the Shach is really telling you this is not a unique halakha to dried cow udders or stomachs, other body. It has to do with any organ of an animal. Any meat which is so dry that it's now dry like wood is no longer a problem of kashrut. Now, l'chatchila, is it only for refu'ah, for healing purposes? We're going to take those pieces one at a time. If you look in source 4, source 4 is Rabbi Cheskel Landau. He is a rabbi in Europe, writes a famous book, Nodab Yehuda. I spoke to you about him recently in one of my other shiurim. And he's dealing with a non-kosher fish, using ingredients from a non-kosher fish. Essentially, the Nodab Yehuda takes the Rama's opinion into consideration regarding the stomach of a cow, but ultimately he disagrees with him. And if you look towards the end of the source, before source 5, that even if a human wouldn't eat it, but a dog could still eat it. It's still considered forbidden. Says the Nodab Yehuda something fascinating. We heard the Rambam say that certain things are patur, you're exempt from them. Why are you exempt from eating them? Says the Nodab Yehuda, you're exempt from eating them not because they're no longer considered nivela, they're no longer considered not kasher. You're exempt from eating them because the Rambam tells you that anything that you eat in an unusual fashion, not in the usual manner with which you eat it, in that case, you're exempt from liability. Not that you can do it, but you're exempt from liability. Says the Nodab Yehuda, but don't misunderstand this teaching to say that something that is dry is completely permissible to eat and do whatever you want with. It's just because consuming something so dried up is not the normal way that you eat it, that you're not liable for a consequence. But at the end of the day, you're not allowed to do it because it's still considered nivela. Now this is a famous opinion of the Nodab Yehuda, and this argument is going to continue throughout the generations. Already near his generation, in source 5, the Magid Mishneh, on the Rambam, he argues with Nadav Buda. And he says, Shemi she'ochal ochel ha'asur achar she'isriach v'hivish ubatel me'ochel adam, harei ze patur v'chen hu. Halacha k'Rabban Shimon damar nevela she'na ruya leger lo shema nevela. Says the Magid Mishneh that this nevela that is now so dry that it's like wood, it's not that if you eat it, you're just exempt because it's eaten the wrong way. But it's because we rule like Rabbi Shimon, and Rabbi Shimon is telling you that davar shepogem, something that is rancid, meaning this food in front of us which is not edible anymore, this food is no longer even considered a nevela at all. And if you would ask me what is the status of this cow's stomach, it is completely kasher. Not just that you're exempt from liability, but it is completely kasher. Now, the Mordechai in Masechet Pesachim, this is about a completely different thing, something else. But he discusses this language of when the poskim use a word like patur, you are exempt. Does it mean it's permissible or just that you're exempt from liability? And he says, Lav dafka ela patur mutar. He says very often, the term patur also means mutar. It's not just you're exempt, but you're exempt and it's completely permissible for you to do this thing. And therefore, it seems the Magid Mishneh is understanding from the Rambam that the Rambam's use of the word patur tells you that not only are you exempt, but also that you're permitted to do this entirely on its own. Now, this is obviously a disagreement in how we are understanding these words, but you have the Nodab Yudah on one side, and the Magid Mishneh on the other side. In source 7, Rabbi Yaakov Reisher, was an Ashkenazi Chacham, in his book Shiviti Yaakov, he says that even something which was completely prohibited in the beginning, so it was a nevela mamash, completely prohibited, and now it is completely dry like wood, this thing is completely permissible. And therefore, he says, if you look on page 5, because there's no more moisture, now it is completely dry, it has no taste anymore, and because of that, this is completely permissible. In source 8, Rabbi Yaakov, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, Luberboim, if my wife was here, she would help me out, from Lisa. He wrote a famous book called the Chavod Dat. And he says that there are different reasons for why this is mutar. You have to analyze the reason why something is mutar before you can apply it somewhere else. And he gives you essentially two different reasons. If you look at the bottom of source 8 on page 5 on the right and the top of page 5 on the left, you'll see two different reasons. Let me share them with you outside. If this is forbidden, only because if dried food is forbidden, this completely wood-like, dry like wood food is permissible, only because it's not the way you normally eat it, if now you bring it back, meaning you hydrate it again, and you make it soft, you make it edible, then this is prohibited all over again. Why? Because the only reason it was permitted when it was dry was because that's not the right way to eat it. But if you hydrate it again, and you make it soft and edible, you put it in a soup, I don't know what you're going to do with it, that no longer would be considered permissible, because now you're eating it the way in which it normally is consumed. But if you believe that it's not because of that this is permissible, but the reason is because it's not a nevela anymore, it lost its status of non-kosher food, then what do I care what you do with it? Now that you brought it back to life, you brought back something kasher to life, so what? It's kasher, now it's just in its new form kasher. So understand regarding gelatin, which they're not speaking about technically, but if you, actually maybe, but they are telling you here two things. If the reason why the gelatin is mutar in its dry form is because that's not the way you normally eat animals, but now that you made it edible again, it's edible, and therefore it's prohibited. But if the reason why it is permissible is because it no longer is considered non-kasher, it's completely kasher in front of you right now, then the fact that you've hydrated, you've brought it back to life, you've turned it into food, doesn't make a difference. It still retains its original status of kasher. In source 9, Harav Tzvi Pesach Frank just summarizes what I told you. So if you want to see a short summary of Harav Tzvi Pesach Frank, Harav Tzvi Pesach Frank is a special chacham. I have time. I can tell you a story about Tzvi Pesach Frank. Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank was the Ashkenazi chief rabbi of Jerusalem. A lot of politics surrounding that, especially when Rav Kook became the chief rabbi, and many people tried to make problems there. Harav Peretz, my rabbi, has a minyan in the synagogue of Harav Tzvi Pesach Frank. So he has a beit knesset he goes to, but he also has a minyan of Ashkenazim that he's the rabbi of. It's right next to his house. Harav Tzvi Pesach Frank was a special chacham. And one day, he was sitting with a bunch of Rashi Yeshiva, Hasidic Rebbes. They were all in his office speaking with him. And Chacham Ovadia Yosef, who was a young bachur, well, maybe he was married, I don't know. He walked into the office to ask Rabbi Tzvi Pesach Frank a question. Rabbi Tzvi Pesach Frank saw Chacham Ovadia Yosef walk in. He stood up for him out of respect to him. He's a senior rabbi of Yerushalayim, standing up for a young yeshiva student. And one of the Rebbes that was sitting there asked in Yiddish, in a derogatory way, Rav, why are you standing up for this Frank? A Frank is a very bad, it's a racial slur for Sephardic Jews. Why are you standing up for this racial slur Sephardic Jew? And Tzvi Pesach Frank told him, he says, don't worry, one day you're going to have to stand up for him also. That was his answer back to him. The Maaseh, he was a special chacham who was very close with the Sephardic community. Tzvi Pesach Frank, he tries to create a case around gelatin. So he was asked regarding ice cream, that they put gelatin inside of it for texture's sake. And then Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank, look how they write gelatin in Yiddish. It's really complicated in source 10. He says that I know that initially there may be a problem. Look on page 6 of Ma'amid. Ma'amid is a special halacha. Ma'amid says that even something which is mixed into food and is nullified in 60, so it's nullified. Unless it is a Ma'amid. We spoke about this with cheese. When something becomes a ma'amid means it's the primary agent that makes it into what it is. It's the standard, stabilizer. I don't know what you would call this word ma'amid in English. The ma'amid, the gelatin, even though it's not as much as the ice cream that is in the ice cream or the milk or the sugar, but the fact that it's such an important ingredient that makes the texture what it is, then we know there's a rule among our rabbis that a ma'amid, afilu be'elef lo batel. A ma'amid is like chametz on Pesach. Even in 1,000, you can't nullify a primary ingredient. It doesn't make a difference that it's so small in number, but it's a primary ingredient of the food that you're eating. And therefore, he suggests, maybe you're not even able to permit it in the first place. Now, he gets involved here in the next two bold sections, trying to figure out that a davar ha'ma'amid, is it prohibited biblically? Is it prohibited rabbinically? Does it actually make a difference? He has a chakira here. Is it the fact that it gives flavor into the food, or even if it doesn't give flavor, it's a problem? He goes through some pilpul over here. I'm skipping that right now. At the bottom of page 6, the Tzvi Pesach Frank wants to go down a different road. He said, "Milashon rama ze mevoar de ma'amid eno batel gam hecha deleta mishum tinatam vim ken yesh le'asor aglida." He said, if from understanding the Rama correctly, I've reached the conclusion that a davar ha'ma'amid like gelatin, even though it does not give off flavor, you don't taste beef inside of your ice cream, it doesn't make a difference. Because it's a ma'amid, it cannot be nullified. And therefore he says, "Aval yesh la'ayin mitzad acher." And therefore I must approach the question of gelatin in a different way than others have approached it. And let's see if we can find a way that can make gelatin mutar, even according to someone like the Noda B'Yehuda of the earlier source, who would never permit such a thing. And his understanding is as follows. The whole conversation here is surrounding something that is not fit for consumption of humans. Humans don't eat this. And because of this, is it a question, is it kasher, is it not kasher? Was it originally rancid, not originally rancid? How about now? He said, but something that is nifsal afilu la'achilat kelev, like chametz on Pesach. Something that even a dog wouldn't eat it. Then there's nobody there who says that is prohibited. Meaning everybody would agree that even if a dog wouldn't eat it, it's not just not fit for human consumption. It's not something a dog would eat either. Then that would make it completely permissible even to the Chachamim, who would prohibit gelatin for the other reasons we mentioned above. And if you look on page 7, he says exactly what I told you. On the top left, he says, "Ve'avak zeh," and this powder that is gelatin, efshar denifsal gam achilat kelev. It could be that even dogs wouldn't eat it. V'shum bal chai lo yochelenu, and no living being would eat this food. Upaka mimeno shem isur, and because of that, it's no longer considered forbidden at all. V'im ken en le'sor ha'ta'arovet, And therefore it wouldn't make any mixture prohibited because the root ingredient gelatin is kasher already, because even a dog wouldn't eat it. He said, but I am not a scientist. I can't make this decision for you. You need to do your homework. You should either ask an expert chemist or a medical professional, a doctor, somebody who could check whether animals would eat this powdered gelatin or not. And until you do your research, don't tell anyone that it's mutar, but also don't tell anyone that it's prohibited. Just wait until the conclusion has been reached. So we've now seen that regarding the stance of is it considered like dried wood or not, there's a machloket. Some say that works, some say it doesn't work. Some say it's patur, but it's still forbidden. Some say it's completely mutar. The Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank tries to give another scenario where everybody would agree it's mutar, and that is, would a dog eat plain gelatin or would they not? That's a good question, and one would have to check that out on their own. On page 8, I want to introduce you to something called musk. Now musk, the problem is musk is used today to refer to so many different things. I can't actually tell you what is the musk that the Rosh is talking about. I'm sure that if I sat properly and spent time sitting on the Rosh and did my research, but for me it's only a side point, and therefore I didn't sit here long enough to tell you, I exactly tell you what is the musk he's talking about. But the way he explains it is that some part of an animal that is really blood, but once they slaughter it, it disappears and it creates a scent. From what I understand, this is a scent that comes from animals. That's what it is, that is used in different productions of food. The Rosh, though he disagrees with him, quotes Rabbeinu Yonah. Rabbeinu Yonah says that any time you take something forbidden and you turn it into something new, it's chadash, it's not what it was before, then this, even when it's mixed into something kasher, and even if it gives good flavor, it's not a problem of kashrut. Understand? He's coming out from a completely different angle. If you take a non-kosher food product and you process it to the point that it's something completely different than what it initially was, then it falls into kosher food. You put it in kosher food, and it gives off good flavor. It's completely permissible because there's nothing wrong with it, because it's a new creation. So what that it comes from something not kosher? Now it's something completely new. The Radbaz, Rabbi David ben Shlomo ben Zimra, he writes the same thing, and he permits the musk, and he even adds something else. He says something that is mixed into food, not for flavor, but it's mixed in for another reason. So for example, with a musk, it's mixed in for the scent, for the smell. So that's not even a problem in the first place, because it's not a food. We're not eating it for its flavor. It's there for a different reason entirely. The Rosh doesn't agree with not the Rabbeinu Yonah and not the Radbaz, but the Ma'adanei Yom Tov says that this is the custom of everybody. He's seen it his whole life, that people use these things all the time, and this is pashut, that this is completely permissible. Regarding Panim Chadashot, look with me on page 10. There's a famous Ashkenazi Chacham, Rabbi Yecheskel Abramsky. Rabbi Yecheskel Abramsky, if I'm not mistaken, was a rabbi in the United Kingdom. Yes, and then he came to Yerushalayim, to Eretz Yisrael. Harav Peretz has a special place in his heart for Rabbi Yecheskel Abramsky. I think they called him Rav Chatzkel Abramsky. That's how they say him by the Ashkenazim. Rav Abramsky, I'll tell you a story about him. Him and his wife were very meticulous people. They were, everything they did like a clockwork. Everything was scheduled, they never deviated from their routines and their schedules. And they say that when Rabbi Abramsky would come home, he would see that the house was full of people waiting to consult with him, ask him halachic questions, whatever else, get advice from him. And he would always see, there's a group, huge throngs of people. He would tell them, wait, please, I need to go speak with my wife. He would close the door, and he'd sit down with his wife for about half an hour, and talk, how was your day? What did you do? What did you eat? What did we say? Anything new? Anybody called? Catch up on everything. And then he would go. And Harav Peretz once told me, said, you think Rav Yecheskel Abramsky did the same thing every day, and his wife also did the same thing every single day. So why do they sit there and talk? He said Rav Yecheskel Abramsky was teaching his students something that even a leader can never give themselves up entirely to their people and forget their family. You still have a wife. You're a rabbi, you're a teacher, you're a principal, you're a politician. You still have a wife. You still have children, you have a husband, you have family, you have people that they're really yours. The rest of the world you can serve them, but not on account of everybody else. And Harav Peretz, when he sent me out to America, he made me promise him that there would be one day a week, at least one day a week, that I don't teach. That's the day that I'm with my kids. If I'm always running to Kehillat to teach here, there has to be a night that I read bedtime stories. There has to be a night that I go for a walk with my wife. He says, it's not, you cannot forget the people you are obligated towards because of the people that you've chosen to serve. Rabbi Cheskel Abramsky was an example of that. Was a very unique person. This teshuvah is not found in the writings of Rabbi Cheskel Abramsky. This teshuvah is found at the beginning of the 4th volume of Tzitz Eliezer, of Rabbi Eliezer Waldenberg, who I told you in the past was the chief rabbi of the Shaar Tzedek Hospital. He was a student and a friend of Harav Uziel. So even though he was an Ashkenazi Chacham, he was very well versed in Sephardic Halakha, to the point that when Harav Uziel founded the World Sephardic Yeshiva, he appointed the Tzitz Eliezer, Rabbi Eliezer Waldenberg, to be the Rosh Yeshiva. And when asked about it, he said because he's the real person who's fitting to be called a Sephardic Rosh Yeshiva. That was Rav Uziel. Rav Tzitz Eliezer, he reaches out to Rabbi Cheskel Abramsky and says, we spoke about gelatin in the past. I would like you, please, to write a teshuvah for me regarding gelatin. And this teshuvah is found in the beginning of the 4th volume of Tzitz Eliezer. If you look in source 1 on this page at the bottom right, essentially, and we didn't read Chacham Ovadia Yosef's opinion yet, but Rabbi Cheskel Abramsky is going to argue with this opinion of Rav Ovadia Yosef, for example, that gelatin is an entirely new creation. It's like what Rabbi Yonatan said. It's a whole new thing. Gelatin is not animal bones. Gelatin is so processed to the point that what's sitting in front of us right now has no relation whatsoever to the bones of the animal that we took it from. And because of that, it's mutar. Rabbi Cheskel Abramsky disagrees. He writes, Davar barur hu, it's so clear to me. Asher ha-gelatin ha-na'asa me'atzamot. The gelatin which is made of bones, eino yitzira chadasha shishtana michomer l'chomer chadash legamre, al yedei emtzeim chimiyim. Just because it went through a chemical process, it didn't transform it from one thing to another thing. The gelatin hu oto chomer atzmo sheyeshno ba'atzamot bikara. The gelatin is the same exact bones, it's just in a different shape. But it's the same thing. You can't tell me, Rabbi Cheskel said, that gelatin is a new creation and it's not bones. Umemela, on the top left of page 10, En kan makom lemasau matan beheter gelatin rasamat manduvotrofot. There's nothing to talk about here. From the writings of Rabbeinu Yonah, that it's a new creation, you can't tell me that gelatin is mutar because it's not something new. And therefore, even Rabbeinu Yonah wouldn't treat gelatin in a permissive way. Omnam, but the halakha, when it comes to actual halakha, dati nota kedat matirim. I actually feel that I should permit gelatin. Mitam she'atzamot enan bichlal nevela terefa utmea l'inyan isur keshem she'enan bichlal nevela l'inyan tuma. Something fascinating. He throws a curveball here. I don't agree with all of you for permitting gelatin because it's a new creation, but I agree that it's permitted for a completely different reason. I believe that the bones are only nevela and trefa in certain contexts, but not in this context. They're not a problem of halakha. And he goes through 3 reasons why he explains that. If you look with me on page 11 on the right side, he says here, kayadua, it's also known, ha-gelatin nasa ma'atzamot. Gelatin is made of bones, acharei shehen mityabshot. After they are dried, keshte shanim b'chom hashemesh. Like for 2 years, he says, in the heat of the sun, be'eretz Hodu, in India. So Rav Cheskel Abramsky is talking here about a very specific type of gelatin. You should know that the first thing that anybody will tell you, look at all these rabbis permitted gelatin. They'll tell you, no, see, you're not doing anything right. You're applying their perspective on gelatin of yesterday to the gelatin of today. Gelatin today is not sitting out in the sun for 2 years in India. Gelatin today is a very fast process. They throw it through chemicals, it turns to gelatin. It's not what he's talking about. And therefore you think, I saw yesterday one rabbi say, that all rabbis who permit gelatin are copy-paste rabbis. They copy the cases of the rabbi, they paste it to incorrect scenarios. As much as I don't appreciate being called a copy-paste rabbi, I will tell you that there's a reason why we believe that these things still apply, because we analyze these halachot and apply them also to the reality in front of us, and I'll explain to you in a minute. Umimela, and therefore, אין כאן מקום לדון ולומר דנהי שעצם העצמות אינן בכלל נבלה טמאה, אבל יש בהם משום דעתם שבאו מהבשר, אבל לאמיתו של דבר רובן ככולן של העצמות, אפילו בעודן לחות לא יהי טעמה. He says they're so dry that they don't give off any flavor from the meat that they absorbed. But he says even if you ever took a dry bone and it's not so dry, it's still a little bit moist, it also likely does not give off flavor. And now we have to think about whether or not he's correct about the gelatin that we have today, I'm going to jump ahead, source ahead, and I'm going to come backwards. If you look with me on page 13, in the right column. He first quotes the Achiezer, Shut Achiezer, we're going to see soon, who shows why it's not a problem of Ma'amid. If you care so much about Ma'amid, you're welcome to look there. On the left side of the page, he says here, that the way that we make gelatin today, that the chemicals that we use on these bones, phosphor, acids, I'm not telling you gelatin is healthy, by the way. All I'm telling you is that it's mutar, correct? The chemicals they use are so harsh, they destroy completely this bone. That doesn't give off any flavor, it's not prohibited at all, and therefore tells the Tzitz Eliezer tells us that even if you don't wait 2 years in the sun of India, the chemical process that is used today to make gelatin accomplishes the same thing. It so much destroys what the original bones and maybe leftover meat is on those bones that it's already considered something that is so dry that it's not a problem of kashrut anyways. But Rabbi Cheskel Abramsky has a different calculation. Even though he feels that gelatin should be mutar, he says, no, there's a political consideration why you should not permit gelatin. Listen carefully. It's a political consideration. On the bottom of page 12, this is all true in halacha, that gelatin is permissible. Lo nira b'zeh isur. It doesn't seem there's a prohibition. But practically, we have to make sure that by teaching people this halacha, we don't cause them to violate halacha. So there's a camp of people that mock Jewish tradition. And they say, look at these rabbis, whatever they decide is kosher. They can even take pig bones and make them kosher. Look at them. But they can't let us do this or that. He says there's a group of people that mock all of the rulings of the rabbis. And maybe we shouldn't permit gelatin so we don't reinforce their stereotype or their attitude that rabbis do whatever they want with halakha. That we can even make non-kosher animals kosher. He says gelatin, because people do not properly understand what is gelatin. And many of the Jewish people think of the Orthodox Jewish community that thinks that gelatin is pig. That's how I was raised. A gelatin is a pig. There's no difference if gelatin falls into your food or if an actual Porky the pig jumps into your food. It doesn't make a difference. It's the same thing. In fact, I think the quintessential, we probably got this from the Muslims. The Muslims are very particular not to have anything derived from pigs. And so they have lists of which toothpaste have gelatin, all kinds of things like that. And the Jews jumped on the bandwagon. They didn't properly understand halakha. There's a difference between a pig and bones even that come from a pig, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. He said because they don't know the process of gelatin, the Jewish community thinks, every Jewish person thought until today that gelatin is prohibited. Says Rabbi Cheskel Abramsky, and now that you come and tell them, some say, not just because they don't know, they even added more. They even think that the gelatin is really just the marrow that comes from the inside of the bones and it's real meat. And it's not a false worry. He said, and therefore it's not unreasonable to assume that if we teach people that gelatin is kasher, they will think, oh, look at these rabbis, they do whatever they want with halakha. And if you look on the top of page 12, even though it's completely permissible in halakha, but practically, if we start teaching people these dangerous things like gelatin is kasher, then they'll start to think that rabbis are all about twisting halakha to fit their own needs. And that is too dangerous for us to sacrifice just to be able to make gelatin kasher. Now you see the beginning of a political struggle. We're fighting against the Jewish people. We're the rabbinic establishment. The Jewish people are not to be trusted with halakha. When we begin to teach them halakha, they'll begin to think, oh, the rabbis do whatever they want because they're Amei Haaretz. And maybe, I'm not judging because I think he was dealing with a crowd that maybe you couldn't educate. But that's why I'm speaking to the Habura, and I'm not speaking to the uneducated crowd. I'm speaking to people who are doing everything possible, a few times a week, taking hours out of their day and their life to learn Torah. So when it comes to you, the halacha, why should I be concerned to tell you, I'm not afraid that you are Amei Haaretz. You're not Amei Haaretz. You have the capability of sitting down and understanding nuance in halakha, so we're telling you the truth. Page 14. So far we've said, maybe it's permissible because it's dry like wood. Yes? The next we said, maybe it's permissible, it's similar to musk. What is musk? It's a new, panim chadashot. It's a new creation completely. And that's the reason why it's permissible. And now, 3, we're going to go down a slightly different road. Hara Peretz understands this to be also connected to gelatin. And I'm showing you on source 1 on page 14. Sheretz saruf. A burnt sheretz. Give me an example of a sheretz. What is a sheretz? I can hear you.
A locust?
A locust, but there are some kosher ones. Okay, let's say a non-kosher locust, okay? A non-kosher locust, okay? Sheretz saruf. You find a burnt one. Mutar le'ochlo mishum refuah. You can eat a completely burned sheretz. It's prohibited to you, but now it's completely burned, you can eat it. De'afra be'almahu. Because it's considered dirt, dust. It's not considered a non-kosher creature. Now that it's burnt, it's permissible for healing purposes, not to save someone's life necessarily, but like you take it as extra vitamins or whatever else. You mix it in. I saw people brushing their teeth with charcoal. Same idea. Yeah, people have something they jump on and they want to do. People used to want to whiten their teeth. Now they're blackening their teeth. Everybody's doing whatever they want. Just pray that Kadosh Baruch Hu, you should keep your teeth for as long as you can. Number 2, mutar lisrof sheretz. It's permissible to burn a sheretz, says the Rama. O Shaar davar isur. You can go and take a sheretz and burn it in order to eat it for refuah's sake. Even somebody who's not going to die if they don't eat it. It's just a regular, you're taking it as vitamins. Except for things that were used for idol worship, like wood of avodah zarah, because wood of avodah zarah, we're never allowed to use it. But you take a sheretz, you decide, scorpion, dried scorpion, ground it up into tablets, mutar. Why? Mishum refuah. Says the Shaar in source 3, that this applies to many more things than you might think, even the things that you're forbidden from getting benefit from. That's where the Shaar extends it. Harav Peretz here quotes a book called the Erech HaShulchan. Have you heard of the Erech HaShulchan? Not the Aruch HaShulchan. Aruch HaShulchan is Rabbi Yonatan Halevy Epstein. Was an Ashkenazi rabbi of Sephardic descent who lived in Europe. I'm talking about the Erech HaShulchan. Anyone heard of him? Just a few weeks ago, I said Shechianu. I was able to finally purchase his set in America. For years, I wanted the set, and I couldn't find it, and I got it. Baruch Hashem, Baruch Hashem. Rabbi Yitzchak Tayyib is his name. Rabbi Yitzchak Tayyib was a rabbi in Algeria. Erech HaShulchan, let's put it this way. Harav Peretz says that the rulings of the Erech HaShulchan are so impossibly stringent all the time. That's always his netiyah. That when you see the Erech HaShulchan say that something is permissible, run with it. So just do whatever he says, you can do it. Because if he didn't find a way to make it prohibited, it's because there's no way to make it prohibited. Harav Peretz quotes here from the Erech HaShulchan. I wanted to bring you the original, but I didn't have a digital copy of it. The Erech HaShulchan says, "Afilu lechatchila mutar livgom ha'isur lesorfo uleochlo v'chen ikar." You can intentionally take something that is forbidden and be pogemit by burning it or any other way in which you are pogemit in order to eat it. And Harav Peretz v'chen ikar, that's a halacha. Makes sense that a davar that is not kasher, that you are pogem, it's not in the end of bitul, so there's a rule, en mevatlin isur lechatchila, you can't nullify, it's not nullifying. Now it's pegima, this pegima is mutar. Harav Peretz understands this, that even if the bones are prohibited, even if the gelatin is a problem, but it's like this burned insect or scorpion. It's something that is considered permissible now in the state in which it is in, and not only for sick people, but also for anybody. And this brings me to a much more fundamental conversation. I know that I'm only 15 pages in through 42 pages, so B'ezrat Hashem, we're going to start running soon. There's a big conversation regarding bones. Are bones even forbidden in the first place? Non-kosher animals are forbidden, but are the bones a problem? The Torah says, "Mibzaram lo tochelu," do not eat from their flesh. Uvenivlatam lo tigaun, don't touch their carcasses. Tameim hem lachem, they are tameim for you. Sifra says, only from the flesh, but not of the bones or the sinews or the hooves. All of those things are not forbidden to you. You can eat those things. The bones of a non-kosher animal are kesherim. Oh, the Torah only forbid the flesh of the non-kosher animal. Don't go now to the store and buy bone broth. Don't run with this. Wait, we're going to have a conversation here. Maran therefore tells you the halakha in source 3. Chatichat nevela, a non-kosher piece of meat, sheyesh ba basar, that has flesh, v'atzamot, and bones, shenafla l'kderat heter. You were making your chicken soup, and in there fell a non-kosher bone with meat on it. Hayisur mitztarfim im heter levatel hayisur. Atzamot hayisur. So now you have a bone with some meat on it that fell into your chicken soup, and you need to do the math. Is there 60 times more chicken soup than the meat and the bones that fell in? Says Maran, you don't have to worry about the bone. The only thing you need to nullify is the meat. Not only do you just have to nullify the meat, but the bone is kasher enough that you can count it as part of your 60 to nullify the meat that it's attached to. Meaning the bone that fell into the soup is so kasher that you can use it to nullify the meat that fell in with it. That's what Maran writes Shulchan Aruch. Of course the kasher bones count. The marrow in there, that's not kasher, that counts with the non-kasher stuff. The pot doesn't count to nullify in 60 in either direction. The Rama doesn't like this so much. The Rama, he says that some are stringent not to count the non-kasher bones as part of the 60. That's too far. Uv'makom have said, but if you're going to lose money, you can rely on Maran, who is permitting, because that's really the halacha. Even though he prefers not to, but you can rely on this. What does Hefsed? One day we'll write an article. The Rama mentions Hefsed in a case of loss, in a case of great loss. I don't recall where, maybe a Taz somewhere I saw. A great loss is like a few chicken livers. That's a serious financial damage to a person. Now, how much do chicken livers cost you? A few dollars? You're going to lose a few dollars, it's money. You can argue you want to say $10, $20. That's enough for the Rama to say, follow Maran. It's a cheap price to pay to follow Maran. Maran writes in the Beit Yosef in source 5 that he gets this halakha from the Ramban and the Rashba. That they both say that the bones of the animal are kesherim enough that they even count as the 60 to nullify the meat that fell in. The Rambam seems to disagree. The Rambam writes that it's afal pi shu asur, harei ze patur, mipnei she'en elu ruim la'achila, vel mitztarfim basar lekezait. Again, the Rambam is consistent in his attitude that the bones are only permissible in the way, I mean, they're not that it's permissible, but because you're not eating them the way they usually are eaten, that's why it's permissible. Not because the bone itself is actually permissible, like we discussed earlier in the earlier Teshuvot. So here's an argument, Maran and Rambam. Now there are those who try to make this work for the Rambam also. So in source 7, the Chavod Da'at is trying to make gelatin permissible also according to the Rambam. And he says essentially that the bones themselves, even though they're asurim to the Rambam, but they don't give off flavor. And because of that, they wouldn't actually make food prohibited because yes, the bone is asur, but it's in such a way that it does not give off flavor like the gid, which is not prohibited. In source 8, we see something similar. The Chavod Da'at says that moist bones that still have moisture, they're forbidden from the rule, kol hayotze min hatameh tameh. Everything that comes out of the forbidden is forbidden. It came from a non-kosher animal, it's forbidden to us. And therefore, they don't have the ability, let's say according to the Rama, to nullify in 60. But they also don't have the ability to make a mixture prohibited. So bones, in this understanding, are midway. They're not kasher, they're not asur, but they're not able to make anything else not kasher. According to this, gelatin wouldn't be a problem even in that direction. In source 9, Rabbi Chaim Ozer, that's what they call him, Rabbi Chaim Ozer Grudzinski. Rabbi Chaim Ozer was a very unique chacham. By the way, if I'm not mistaken, Rabbi Chaim Ozer was once traveling across a border in Europe, and he had to cross the border, and they wouldn't let him into Russia. I don't know, one of these stories. They didn't let him into that country because he didn't have a profession. They didn't let immigrants that didn't have professions. They said, "What are you?" He said, "I'm a rabbi." He said, "Yeah, but where's your certificate of rabbi?" "I don't have a certificate of rabbi." He has a certificate of rabbi. So they say he telegrammed the Chavetz Chaim that he needs semicha, And the Chavetz Chaim sent him a semicha via telegram, and then he was able to pass the border. But it's when Rabbi Aaron Lichtenstein, alav shalom, made Aliyah to Israel, and you know me, I'm not from the Gush, but I respect Talmidei Chachamim for wherever they come from. When he made Aliyah to Israel, the son-in-law of Rabbi Soloveitchik, they told him that he doesn't have semicha from the Rabbanut, so he can't be considered a rabbi in Israel. So he said, oh, so what should I do? What do I need to do to become a rabbi? So you have to take all the exams, like 7 years worth of exams. He said, come, give me all the exams. He sat down for a few hours, he answered all the exams, and then he became a rabbi in Israel. So if I don't know, if Rabbi Moshe Feinstein would make Aliyah to Israel, alav shalom, they would make him pass the semicha exams also, so he could be considered a rabbi in Israel. Rav Chaim Ozer Grudzinski wants to give 2 reasons why gelatin does not prohibit the mixture that it falls into. The first is because it became powder, and this powder is like any other dust or dirt that doesn't make something prohibited. And the second, in source 9, is that the Rambam only prohibits moist bones. But his understanding is that even the Rambam would permit dried bones in a mixture of food. You don't have to accept his reading, but this is a possible reading. I bring you now to page 18, where the debate goes on. In the United States of America, and likely in most English-speaking countries, gelatin is considered completely prohibited. Even though I've now brought you, and I brought you so many Ashkenazi rabbis, intentionally. Look how many Ashkenazi Chachamim permit gelatin. And not because we're relying on names. The analysis of Halacha led them to permit gelatin, each one for different reasons. Nonetheless, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein says that gelatin is not permissible at all, and this has become the standard matter of Halacha in American kashrut agencies, and I'm assuming it's like that elsewhere in the world. The state of Israel has 2 levels of kashrut from the chief rabbinate, one that permits gelatin and one that doesn't. Chacham Ovadia Yosef, in source 2 on page 19, has a lengthy conversation regarding gelatin. It's perhaps one of the most foundational conversations on gelatin that exists in Halacha. This is complemented by a text that I did not have in digital form. If you look in a book called Masa Ovadia are speeches that Chacham Ovadia Yosef gave at rabbinic assemblies, printed by Mossad HaRav Kook. There's maybe a 17 or 18 page speech that Chacham Ovadia Yosef gave, in which he also very clearly explains gelatin and why he believes that gelatin is permissible according to Halacha. If you are excited to read things that are very long, I brought you the whole Teshuvah in full, so that you don't have to go buy yourself a set of Yabia Omer, but you're welcome to just keep the source sheet and look at the entire Teshuvah yourself. And that's why on page 27, Chacham Ovadia Yosef says, "V'hu hadin liyan gelatin." The gelatin, sheyesh latir, that it is permissible. And he says he remembers other Chachamim, and that's what Rav Waldenberg also says, his dear friend Rav Waldenberg, V'chen yikar la'halacha l'maaseh, and that is the simple conclusion, the halacha, in his opinion. There's a teshuvah that I have in a PDF. I attached it to my Google Classroom, though those of you in the Chavurah didn't get it, but I can send it maybe to Mord, who can forward it to you. Rabbi Chaim David Shelush, Alam Shalom, one of my favorite Sephardic Chachamim of this generation. Mamash passed away not so long ago. Rabbi Chaim David Shelush has a teshuvah about gelatin in which he prohibits gelatin entirely. And so it's not fair to say this is a Sephardic or Ashkenazi argument. And if you wanted to see the logic, I simply wasn't able to bring it for you here because I don't have access to a digital format of it. But I will be able to send you a PDF if anybody wants of the writings of Rabbi David Shelush. My rabbi, Mori Harav Yaakov Peretz, in the year 2019, a number of rabbis got together, and I'm sorry for speaking about this on camera to the Chavurah. A number of rabbis got together in a neighboring city of San Diego, where I used to teach Shiurei Torah. And they started harassing my students in Los Angeles. Made their lives quite difficult. And all we did was we would meet regularly and study Shulchan Aruch. It's literally what we did. We sat and learned Shulchan Aruch. And that became the most controversial thing you could possibly imagine in the world. Today, you could study Avodah Zarah, you can study Christianity, you can meditate and do goat yoga in the middle of the Beit HaKnesset. But, Chas v'Shalom, you should study Shulchan Aruch. I want to share a story, but I don't want those who will listen to disqualify me for sharing the story. Rabbi Saul Lieberman was a very unique personality. I'm not a student of Rabbi Saul Lieberman. I don't know that I even own books of Rabbi Saul Lieberman. Tosefta Kipshuta, he spent his life dedicated to the study of the Tosefta. He was the Rosh HaYeshiva of the Jewish Theological Seminary, which started as a Sephardic institution and then was taken over by the conservative movement. And unfortunately, many people don't know the Sephardic origins of the Jewish Theological Seminary of America. He was unique, and he was a European rabbi who became a rabbi knowingly or unknowingly, of the conservative movement. Professor Mark Shapiro, who I believe taught at the Habura before, he has a small book dedicated called Saul Lieberman and the Orthodox. It's a fascinating read about the evolution of orthodoxy and what really makes someone orthodox or not. Rabbi Saul Lieberman once wrote a letter to his Bet Adin saying, I see that you are afraid of ruling in this matter of halakha. He says, don't worry. He says, the Orthodox will never blame you for innovating in halakha. They will only blame you for teaching what it actually says inside of the books of halakha. That's what Rabbi Saul Lieberman said. And the Rambam tells us, you must accept the truth from whomever says it. So these rabbis got together and they decided that they're going to get me ousted from Los Angeles. It didn't work. Baruch Hashem, I have many friends in Los Angeles and many good people in Los Angeles. It didn't happen. And the next move they decided to do was to disqualify me on a higher level. And they reached out to Mori Harav Yaakov Peretz. And they told him, you have a student here in America, you don't speak English, you don't understand the things that he's saying. He's teaching very dangerous things here in America. He's telling people all about gelatin, that it's kasher, and all kinds of things. They made a list of 12 things that I've taught in public that are absolute violations of halakha. I'm embarrassed to tell you that most of them were Sephardic rabbis. And Harav Peretz's reaction was twofold. One, who do you think taught him all of these halachot? He learned them from me. Don't tell me that you're ratting out my talmid to me. This is exactly what I taught him. It's good that he's teaching them in public. And the second thing is that I never saw a group of rabbis so shamelessly showing the world how ignorant they are of the basic tenets of halakha. He said, you went from being rabbis at the beginning of the letter to being amei haaretz by the end of the letter. And unfortunately, that's the reality in which we live. Harav Peretz is exactly everything I've told you today is summarized by Harav Peretz here. Harav Peretz brings 3 things that are kesherim based on this conversation. The first, tolaim adumim. They tell you about insect coloring that is put inside of food. And they're right. Carmine, for example, is an insect coloring that is found in many juices and other such things. Tolaim adumim shemiyabshim otam v'tzovim behem mashke yen shechal mutar. They're permissible because they've been dried and turned into a powder, and now that color is food. It's permissible. By the way, the chief rabbinate also uses carmine in their food. The non-mehadrin line uses regular carmine, and the mehadrin line waits for 12 months for the carmine to age. Yani, now it's dry, and then they use the carmine in their food. Dam taish shenikrash. Taish is a goat. Dam taish shenikrash v'nityabesh. Dried goat blood that congealed and dried. Nohagim lo. We have a custom of eating it. This is the Chidah who tells you. What is this used for? To color foods, for example. You use paprika to turn things red. You can use dried goat blood. Now, blood is prohibited, but now that it's dried, it's permissible. And then Harav Peretz writes here that gelatin also is permissible, even if it comes from nivelot, utrefot, ubehemot temeot. One of the rabbis there wanted to say all of the conversation about gelatin is only from cows and kasher animals that are not slaughtered properly. But pigs, how could it be? Also pigs. So all of the animals. Mutarim, they are permissible, and that's our understanding of the halakha. I quoted to you from Rabbi Eliezer Melamed. Rabbi Eliezer Melamed, I did not learn his Beit Midrash. He's authored a terrific set of books, Pinei Halakha. Listen, I don't agree with Rabbi Eliezer Melamed on everything. I don't have to agree with him. He doesn't have to, he's bigger than me, so he doesn't have to answer me anything. I have also personal issues with the philosophies and the worldview of the camp, perhaps, that Rabbi Eliezer Melamed belongs to. But is a rabbi who has spent his entire life not just teaching Torah, but making halakha accessible to as many human beings as possible, in a pleasant way, in a beautiful way, but also in a way that is rigorous. Sources. He wrote a Penei Halakha, which I will tell you sounds almost like a modern Bet Yosef. All of the halachot. If you don't own a set, today they're already translating these volumes into English, and he is so much wanting to share this Torah with the world that it's available on Sefaria for free. You're welcome to just go and read and download, and he doesn't even want to make the money off of those books. Rabbi Eliezer Melamed has recently become the object of much scorn and ridicule in the modern Orthodox religious Zionist community in Israel. For 2 things. He has adopted a Sephardic approach to conversion, and that made him already a target a long time ago. And he's stood behind many very unique Sephardic rabbis who deal with the topics of conversion. Whether I agree or not is not relevant. And the second, in the last few years, Rabbi Eliezer Melamed has worked very hard to make inroads with the Reform and conservative Jewish communities. And you can say he's not doing enough. Some say he's doing too much. He's felt that what's tried in America and what tried in the United Kingdom and what was tried in Europe of banning and separating and staying away, it didn't work. Ultimately, that didn't work in helping the Jewish community stay together. And he wanted a different approach. If we would be able to sit and to meet and to dialogue and also not agree with each other. There has to be a way for the rabbinate of Israel to welcome non-Orthodox leaders to Israel while also not compromising on the integrity of the halachic system of Israel. And you can argue it's very bold and maybe he's wrong. It doesn't make a difference. He's made a tremendous Kiddush Hashem in this regard. And what happened is that all of his colleagues ganged up against him very recently, and they've banned his books. And unfortunately, many yeshivot have thrown his books out the windows. They burned them. I'm talking about current events right now. And this is a sad thing. I'm bringing him here just to give him a little bit of respect. He mentions a few different, the reasons why those who prohibit, why those who permit are permissive. And then at the end he says, the maaseh, the bottom line, those who wish to be lenient are able to. You're arguing ultimately about something that is rabbinically prohibited. It is not biblically prohibited. And because of that, we have so many reasons to permit something rabbinic. And the halacha is that whenever you have a doubt as to a rabbinic law, you are lenient. If somebody wants to be stringent, they can. And he says also, maybe nowadays it's better to buy gelatin only with a hechsher. Fine, he says that. But at the end of the day, you're dealing with a rabbinic law. And as a rabbinic law, it's amazing why so many people make such a commotion over this halacha. On page 29, I brought you a tshuva from Rabbi Eliezer Waldenberg about gelatin capsules. So gelatin eating is permissible. How much more so swallowing, which is not even the way in which you would eat something. Swallowing isur is permissible, especially for healing people. What led to a big debate on page 29, source 2, and on page 31, source 3, is something that I wish we'd had more time to think about, but is the sausage skins. And you might never eat this again after you hear what I'm going to tell you, but aside from whatever maybe already pagum meat is inside of your hot dogs or sausages, there is a method in which the intestines of animals are dried and then used almost like a plastic casing to surround the meat and make it into a sausage. Likely you know what I'm talking about if you've seen sausage links or things like that. And the question is whether or not you can use those in kosher food and use the non-kosher intestines of animals that are dried and processed to hold kosher meat to make kosher sausages and hot dogs and the like. And there's a machloket here between the rabbis whether it's like gelatin and permissible or whether it's like gelatin and prohibited. Famously, Chacham Ovadia Yosef was permissive about this. The Ashkenazi chief rabbi never agreed. I think lately the last two chief rabbis were able, it was like a deal of the century. They've been finding about very important things, like the skins on sausages. And that's what they get paid for. And this whole approach was calmed down. They agreed that Israel would allow non-kasher sausage skins to be used for the kasher line of the chief rabbinate, and the Mehadrin line wouldn't have these sausage. Mehadrin people, they don't have to eat the sausage skins. But Lamaaseh, this would be our attitude that also in a situation like sausage skins, these things would be mutarim. So, Rabotai, to conclude, gelatin, in my opinion, is kasher. In all of its forms, in all of its shapes, in all of its sizes. And there are reasons why somebody would want to avoid it. I'm not going to fight you. There's no mitzvah to eat gelatin. To the contrary, the foods in which gelatin is usually found are not so healthy for you anyways. So it could be that there's a mitzvah to stay away from those foods entirely, regardless of whether the gelatin is there or not. But I wanted to close with something else. And I have a few more minutes with you. And if you would give me those few more minutes, I would really appreciate being able to sit with you and talk about this. Closing thoughts on page 33. We've been learning together now for the last 8 weeks. And likely, those of you who have come to learn with me have known me from before, and if you haven't, you've pretty much gotten the scoop that we're all about kashrut, we're going to learn about kashrut. And I already told you at the beginning of this series that for me, kashrut is not that important. What do I mean? Of course it's important to keep the laws of kashrut. But unlike other Jewish denominations who the whole day spend their life talking about kashrut, if you come to my community on a Shabbat, you likely will never hear us talk about kashrut at all. If you sit in one of our shiurim, we barely broached it. We learned it once, and how much can you talk about gummy bears? But there are some people, their whole Judaism is about Cheetos and Doritos and gummy bears. The whole religion is about this. And I understand, and I respect, and I know that sometimes is the sensation when we're choosing these topics. Yeah, there was an idea to be a little sensational and bring topics that are hot topics in the Jewish community. But the reason I still deal with matters of kashrut is for a few reasons. One of them I mentioned at the end of last class. Some of you resonated with it, and that is I see kashrut being used as one of the greatest ways to oppress people. I see Jewish communities that are held hostage by people who are authorities that don't allow for the people to actually know what halakha says. And because of that, people are captives. They're literally captives. People lose money that they don't have to buy foods that they don't even need to be kasher in the first place. Relationships, friendships, families are broken up over other people's control and manipulation over halakha. But there are more reasons than that. And I want to read to you some sources, and with this I'll end today's shiur. Rabbi Peretz in source 1 on page 33 explains to us the philosophy behind this. Kodem, he says, before I begin writing to you, Abi Akan, I wish to share here the feeling of suffering of upright Torah scholars. We are bewildered. Rabbi Peretz is an old guard. Saying, I'm bewildered to see the Jewish approach that people of our generation are taking, the improper roads they are walking on. It is the numerous opinions, and the doubts, and the concerns, which pass far past any boundary of normalcy and truth. You live in a generation that is afraid, who are afraid to rule halachot from the Shulchan Aruch. The same Shulchan Aruch we've been learning for generations. And they are concerned of some later opinion that Maran didn't care about. He said, and they add stringency upon stringency upon stringency, and said ultimately it leads to leniencies. And what happens out of all of this? It is fulfilled in us what our rabbis saw in their Ruach HaKodesh. Our rabbis tell us in Masechet Shabbat that one day the Torah will be forgotten from the Jewish people. Rashbi says, what does that mean? Amos, the prophet, tells us they will grapple to find the words of Hashem and they will not find them. What does that mean? What does it mean the Torah will be forgotten? People will no longer find clear, decided, simple halachot in one place. Everything will be so complicated that halakha will lose its clarity. And because of this, that type of generation, even though they think they learn Torah, that generation has already lost the Torah. The Torah has already been forgotten. Now, Rabbi Peretz says, I'm sitting here looking at a Jewish community that is so afraid to just do things the right way because of this opinion and that opinion and the next opinion. Said, how much can you live your life like that? The Gemara, Talmud Bavli, Masechet Sanhedrin tells us, Minayin shekol hamosif gorea. How do you know that anybody who adds to the Torah is really taking away from the Torah? Shenemar, he tells us the story of the Garden of Eden. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, don't eat from the tree. And what do they say? No, also don't touch from the tree. They added a fence, no? And when the fence was broken, she touches the tree. She's, oh, if I can touch the tree, I can also eat the tree. This story teaches us that adding a fence to the Torah can actually undermine the entire Torah completely and get us thrown out of Gan Eden. So Rabbi Peretz asked in source 3, but our rabbis taught us to make a fence for the Torah. So what was wrong with Adam Rishon and Chava? What was wrong with making that fence for the Torah? And he gives two answers. The first, that when you add fences to the Torah, you have to know what is the Torah and what is the fence. What is biblical law? What is rabbinic law? What is a minhag? What is an old minhag? What is a new minhag? What is a fabricated minhag? You have to learn halakha with nuance, with sophistication. It can't be, oh, it's forbidden. What is forbidden from who? From the Torah? Forbidden from the rabbis? Forbidden because someone 300 years ago in Poland or Morocco said something? What is who does that forbid? The word forbidden, what does it mean? You're allowed to add chumrot, but you have to know what is the fence and what is the Torah. And when you know, then you know you won't make the mistake that the Chava did. You won't say, oh, I touched the tree, I'm fine, so I can eat it from it too. You'll know that. I touched the tree, was nothing wrong with it. Eating the tree was the problem. The second, there are certain mitzvot that are so difficult already, you don't need to make them harder. Or certain mitzvot that are so stringent already. People are so careful, for example, about taharat mishpacha. It's a thing that Jewish people take very seriously, even those who are not fully committed to observance of halakha. So why do you have to make it already more complicated? They're already taking care of the rules. Why? Because we live in a generation where adding chumot on chumot on chumot is the norm already. Rabbi Peretz though calls out kashrut completely in source 4. And I wish I would have added one more source here from his newest book that we published with Shiviti through him. But I didn't have time to put it in the source sheet. Mechila. Rabbi Peretz writes, Bizmanenu nowadays, Rabu badatz shel kashrut. We have multiple kashrut agencies. Badatz means bedin tzedek. Everybody can call themselves a badatz. Kol kibbutz anashim, what has happened? Every group of people, machzik bekashrut shelo. They say, my hechsher is a good hechsher. Fine, everybody thinks their hechsher is a good hechsher. We got it. Uposel bekashrut shel acherim shelo kadin. But they say that other people's kashrut is not good, which is not true. I mean, it's okay you say your kashrut is great. But how do you say their kashrut is not great? From where? V'na'asa Am Yisrael mefozar u'mforad. So let's count all the things that happen. Am Yisrael becomes separated from each other. Who said these words? Haman. Haman told Achashverosh, the king, the Jewish people, Yishno Am Echad mefozar u'mforad ben ha'amim. There's one nation that's scattered and dispersed. Datem shonot mikolam. They have a different faith than everybody else. The Jewish people become separated because of these kashrut politics that exist from these agencies. People cannot go visit each other and be hosted by each other. And we fall, we stumble because we lose out. We lose out on the ability to fulfill the basic mitzvah of Avraham Avinu that was his life, to host other people, to do achnasat ochim, to have guests, to eat with each other. And this type of kashrut politics cause us to distance ourselves from the love of other human beings. It also diminishes our humanity. Listen, a child becomes observant and goes to his mother's home. And his mother says, my dear son, can I make you a cup of tea? He says, oh, sorry mom, I can't eat in your house. Enoshiyut. Humanity, that's a human being eats in his mother's house. We distance ourselves from that. We lose out on the mitzvah, biblical mitzvot, of to love your fellow like yourself. And these people who think that they are so particular about kashrut, they're so mehadrim. Aside from the mitzvot they stay away from, they actually do an avirah. They make food prices so high that they are stealing money from Jewish people who don't have money. We had a guy come through here, he only eats matzah shemura on Pesach, which is fascinating chumrah. He only eats handmade shemura matzah. It was a chassid that came through here. And he's begging. I said, let me buy you matzot. I can get you boxes of machine-made matzot. I'll get them for you. No, I can't eat those on Pesach. My dear friend, you're collecting in my house a few days before Pesach because you don't have money. Chacham Yosef, when he was young, didn't have money. He only ate machine matzot. He can't afford it. Who can afford it? Today in America, you can buy handmade matzot. Forget soft matzot. $50, $60, $70 a pound. Do you know that? Now we sell matzot, soft matzot, but it's a fundraiser for the Kehillat. It's not a selling. Really, if you come work here, you get them for free. But this matzot. So he came, he got matzot. Listen to this story. I managed to get him a box, special box with 3 matzot shemurot for his seder. Like, it was a special box. I got it for him. He comes back to me the next day. Rabbi, do you have another box? Come on, like, how much can you? I don't even buy matzot shemurot like that for my friend. I said, what happened to your box yesterday? He said, the driver who drives the collectors around, he takes a 50% cut of anything we bring in. And not only does he take 50% of our money, but he took 1.5 matzot from my box of 3 matzot. By the way, that collector, not the collector, the man who drives them around, he's not allowed in my Beit HaKnesset. Last time he came here, I told him he's welcome to leave. He could do teshuvah publicly now, or he can leave. And if he ever comes back, we'll have a restraining order on him. I'm not afraid. Al-Rasha. How do you steal matzot from a person that have food? Lo yuman ki supah. But this guy is even worse. Whoever made that chassid a chassid didn't teach him, my dear friend, if he doesn't have matzot, you can imagine his wife doesn't have clothing. You can imagine his kids don't have bread. So what are you busy? Teach people what they're able to do. They hold these people hostages. V'yesh maniskakim lahem. And there are those who rely blindly on these kashrut agencies. Hem avrachei hayeshivot. They are the yeshiva students and kollel scholars sheparnasatam meuta, that are famously very low on parnasah. Ve'enam yodim halacha bura. And what's also known about students of the yeshivot is they don't know halacha. So they're poor and they don't know halacha. That's how it is. 2 rules. You meet a yeshiva student, ask him any question you want. What I don't know, what Rabbi Akiva Eger writes, the Brisker Rabbs, but you ask him, how do you wash your hands in the morning? No idea even which page Shulchan Aruch to find it on. These people rely on the kashrut agencies to tell them what is right. Shenoktim klal b'chol davar. They have a rule in their hands. Kol hamachmir harei ze meshubach. Whoever is stricter is better. V'konim ma'achalim ma'kashrut ha'machmira shehu b'yoker rav. And they end up buying food only from the most expensive hechsharim, and they lose out money for their families, for their children, because they think this is what they have to do. How long can you be quiet? How can you say, don't get involved, it's politic, kashrut, don't say anything, it's fighting, Am Yisrael, achadut. I'm looking at the poor people who are suffering. I'm looking at the people who work hard, and they come to Pesach, and it's 3 days before Pesach, and they've already spent their entire month's salary buying food for Pesach, and there's still 3 days to go. People who work, how can it be? How long can we let it be that way? This is a matter of you must stand up and do what is correct. There's a philosophy behind this. It's not that we choose to get involved in the kashrut because we care about gummy bears. We care about Am Yisrael. Am Yisrael should be able to take. There was a famous Ashkenazi chacham, I don't remember now who, my wife told me the story, that there was a blood libel in Europe. And he said that the people who are responsible for the blood libel are the rabbis. The rabbis who steal the blood from people by making kosher food so expensive, that they're the ones who bring about blood libels on Am Yisrael. They're the original blood libel. They steal from the dam, from the remember the Gemara says that somebody who fasts, he loses his blood. That's a kapara for him. He said the people don't have money to buy food anymore. There's a halacha. Even the Mishnah Berurah quotes it. It's before the holiday. And fish is too expensive. Fish is too expensive, so what do the chachamim have to do? Why is it too expensive? Because the Jewish stores know that everybody's coming to buy kasher fish. So they make the prices high. The job of the chachamim is to say it's forbidden to buy fish from the kasher stores. You're only allowed to buy fish from the goyim. To break the market. That's the halacha. That was a famous Ashkenazi rabbi, mine is slipping me right now. Somebody once came to fight with him. Rabbi, you boycotted our stores. How could it be? We're not getting it. He says, because you raise the prices. Lower the prices. We'll let people shop in your stores. Maybe it was the Mishnah Berurah. Maybe it was the Chavetz Chaim. It could be. And on the way out, the rabbi tells us, hey, my dear friend, just remember, you can't even buy fish from yourself. That's how much you're violating halakha. You have to go buy your own fish from the goyim. And perhaps you'll allow me just a couple more minutes to share with you the last source. I'm not going to read it to you. Of Rabbi Avraham Yitzchak HaKohen Kook. Harav Kook was a very unique chacham. And he dealt with an issue we're right about Pesach now. That in Tel Aviv, Yafo, where he had his betadin, there was a Jewish man who owned a sesame oil factory. They made sesame seed oil. Now, there was a big debate whether sesame seeds are kitniyot or not. It's miraculous to me how certain things that didn't exist when people started observing kitniyot and now became kitniyot all of a sudden. So, like, there are new things that didn't. Moshe Feinstein, for example, says peanuts are not kitniyot because in Russia we didn't know what peanuts were. So how could they be kitniyot? Sesame seeds, some believe, fall into that category. This man said, Rav Kook, I can't shut down my factory for 8 days of Pesach. If nobody will buy my oil, then I won't be able to survive the economic crisis here. And so Rav Kook said, watch, sesame oil is kasher for the following reason. Even if it is kitniyot, but it's not. He didn't believe it. Even if it is kitniyot, what's the deal? Even if it is kitniyot, because it's cold pressed with no liquids, it's dry processing, you extract the oil, even grains that didn't come in contact with water are kasher on Pesach. How much more so something that is kitniyot, that never came in contact with water, it's going to be kasher for Pesach? How can you treat sesame seeds more stringently than you treat chametz itself? And so he permitted this. There's a group of rabbis in Yerushalayim, the Badat Seidah Charedit, they decided to wage a war against Harav Kook about this. And that if he's a slippery slope, he's allowing sesame seeds, that means soon they're going to be chametz on Pesach, and they went to war. And there are letters in his book, Orach Mishpat, I think that's what it's called. He discusses, Orach Mishpat, he discusses all back and forth. There's maybe half a dozen letters between them, back and forth. And Harav Kook says something fascinating. He says, you know why we have to permit the sesame oil? Not just because it's permissible. And not just because you can't treat a minhag more than you treat a halakha. And not just because you shouldn't stick your nose in the business of the Bedin over here. This is but for more reasons than that. He says, I know this generation. That's what Rav Kook says. I know this generation. And this generation has tremendous distrust of Torah scholars. Tremendous distrust of rabbis. And when they see us prohibiting things all the time, they just say, anything you ask the rabbi, he'll tell you no. But if we tell them, this is mutar, you can eat this on Pesach, they will say, wait a second, this rabbi is actually teaching us halakha? They'll listen to us, he said. It will restore the rabbinate, the dignity of the rabbinate in the eyes of the people. And then when we tell them that something is prohibited, that it's really prohibited, they'll finally listen to us. Because they know that we trust them to tell them the truth. We're telling them the truth and people want to hear the truth. So this generation that you think is heretical and they're about to violate all halachas, you can't give them an inch. You give them an inch, they'll take a mile. This generation is on the verge of collapse. And they're on the verge of collapse because they don't trust the rabbis, and frankly, rabbis, you don't trust them either. Because by saying, don't teach this to the masses, remember we saw that earlier in the Teshuvah? Don't teach the masses things. That's a fundamental philosophy in halakha. There are rabbis in rabbinic organizations and entire schools of thought in the Jewish community. The Jewish people cannot be trusted with halakha. By the way, when the Rambam wrote his Mishneh Torah, it was the same thing. There were rabbis who attacked how dare you give access to the law to people? The people don't deserve access to the law. They have to listen to us. This is not a new fight. It's an old fight. And Rav Kook says, of any generation, you could argue they did it. This generation is different. This generation, when we tell people the truth, they ultimately listen to us. And I'll tell you, this is how it works. When I came to Los Angeles and I started teaching halakha, for years, the Sephardim there didn't keep chalak. They didn't eat meat that was glat kasher. And I would tell them these halachot. And by the time it came for me to speak about chalak, all of a sudden, they said, well, if this rabbi says the gelatin is okay, and we don't have to keep chalav Israel, but by chalak he tells us we have to do it, or by yashan we have to do it, I cannot tell you the dozens and dozens of people who after years of other rabbis not being, they listened. Why? Because they finally felt trusted. I'm a doctor, I'm a lawyer, I'm an accountant, I'm an engineer, I'm a professional, I'm a person who I have a brain. Stop treating me like a child. Treat me like an adult. And when you treat me like a mature, sophisticated adult, my Judaism will become mature and sophisticated also. And the only people who don't want a mature and sophisticated Judaism are those whose Judaism is too simple and too ignorant to appreciate maturity and sophistication. And my words to you as a Habura, I don't know if we'll learn together before Purim or before Pesach. I want you to know that you belong to a group of individuals here, led by a Talmid Chacham, one of the most excellent Talmidei Chachamim in the world. Rabbi Dweck, he should live and be well. HaKadosh Baruch Hu should protect him and guard him, both physically and spiritually. And those who stand with him, if it's Sina, and if it's Avi, and if it's all the other founders of the Chavua, if it's our moderators, Ohad and Mord, and everyone else who's allowed me, and if it's all of you, the members who learn here, to realize that you're not just learning about Torah here. Don't underestimate what you're doing to the Jewish community right now. You are making ripple waves through the whole Jewish world. Look, all of the people that the rabbi said we couldn't trust, look at them 3 nights a week, 4 nights a week, sitting down with sources in Hebrew, learning, writing notes, asking questions, involved in Limud Torah. What you are doing is changing this conversation. And you are showing, hopefully, all of Chachmei Israel, you can trust us. We want to hear the truth. We want to learn more. And B'ezrat Hashem, I bless you all, that you should continue learning Torah together in health and happiness, and the Chavua should grow Michael El Chayil from strength to strength. And I look forward to being here back with you again, B'ezrat Hashem, very soon. Thank you so much for learning with me.